You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
The first time I ever heard of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund had to do with a comic creator I know named Kieran Dwyer. Now, you may know Kieran from his work on Captain America, Batman, or the Avengers, but he had a creator-owned comic back then called LCD, or Lowest Comic Denominator. And his first cover was a parody of the Starbucks logo. It had some unflattering terms on it, but it was a parody cover. And Starbucks heard about it and came after him like a big corporation does. I believe the lawyer that helped him at the time referred to it as carpet bombing an anthill to describe how Starbucks came after him. And it was the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund that stood up for him, that helped him out to get through it. And they've been doing it for decades. So we're going to talk about them today with their interim head at this point. And we'll get that going right now. Stick around for the Dan Wickline Show. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Dan Wickline Show here on The Experience. The Comic Legal Defense Fund is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection of the First Amendment rights of comic arts form and a community of retailers, creators, publishers, librarians, and readers. They provide legal referral, representation, advice, assistance, and education in furtherance of these goals. Now, some of the books currently being challenged are things as simple as The Amazing Spider-Man Revelations by J. Michael Straczynski and John Romita Jr., Batman, The Killing Joke by Alan Moore and Brian Boland, Blankets by Craig Thompson, Bone by Jeff Smith, Dragon Ball by Akira Toriyama, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, Mouse by Art Spiegelman, and even Why the Last Man by Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerrera. Now, our guest today is a transactional and civil litigation attorney, ethics advisor, and a crisis manager with a focus on creative industries, including media, fashion, and comics, as well as all types of nonprofit organizations. He is currently the interim director of the CBLDF, Jeff Trexler. Welcome, sir.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, it's good to have you here. Basically, for me, there's always just been two charitable organizations having to do with comics, at least with the creative side of it: Hero Initiative and the CBLDF. And it's always, donate to one of them, And so I've been following the CBLDF since the days of Kieran Dwyer and Starbucks. It was my first experience with them. How long have you been associated with them?
I've been associated with them since 2020, although the first time that I ever attended a CBLDF was back with Paul Mavridy's case. It was a tax dispute back in the late 90s. I was a clerk in California in 1995, 96, where there was a gathering out in Los Angeles or Pasadena, something like that.
Now, I'll be honest, I lifted the description for from the CBLDF website. I'm not that creative of a writer to come up with those terms. But how would you describe the CBLDF to, Ed and Cool and the other people watching right now?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund is an organization that's dedicated to protecting the legal and constitutional rights associated with comic arts. And it was founded primarily, the inciting incident, as you say, when you're writing fiction, was the arrest of a staff member at a comic shop in Illinois called Friendly Frank's. This person was convicted, sent to jail for selling such shockingly obscene, hardcore pornographic works as heavy metal, Richard Corbin's The Bodyssey, Omaha Cat Dancer, and publisher of Omaha, Dennis Kitchen, did a fundraiser for the defense on appeal for this individual who had been convicted. They hired an attorney, a First Amendment lawyer, who was also Bert Joseph, who was also the attorney for Playboy, which at the time was considered, of course, so obscene that lots of challenges for Playboy as well. And they got the conviction reversed. And so, it was a success. They raised a lot of money. And as somebody who, I'm a lawyer, I went to law school to work with nonprofit organizations and do ethics and that kind of stuff. One of the things that impressed me about it was that, they realized there was a need, and they raised money for one case. They realized there were going to be other cases. So they founded an organization. This was a nonprofit where you had, leaders who were bringing it together, but it really was a community. It grew out of the community. Everybody was concerned about this in comics. We've been through the 1940s and 1950s with the great comic book scare. People in the underground community had seen, Zap number 4 declared obscene by a court in New York. They'd encountered a number of other things. You may remember the Air Pirates thing with involving copyright and some decades earlier, and or a decade or so earlier. And so the people in comics were really concerned about this. They joined together, pooled their money, created an organization, and it has lasted now for, I guess we're going on the 37th year, which is rare to find an organization that can last that long and be strong and continue to be relevant, doing the mission for which was founded. And protecting rights associated with the comic arts covers a lot of things. You mentioned the Kieran Dwyer case with Starbucks. I mean, you had free expression there was being curbed through over enforcement of IP rights. In some instances, I've helped people protect IP rights over the years. Other instances, there could be some overreach, like in that instance where there was a parody that was trying to be shut down. So anything we can do to help people in comics, I'm right here for them.
Yeah, I remember the Kieran case very well, and Starbucks wasn't even that big at that point. They were still kind of growing. So. Now, how did you get involved in this? What was the case? Well, you said you clerked, but what got you into you're currently the interim position?
There are two aspects of it. One, I've been reading comics as far back as I can remember. My earliest, memories of reading and watching TV and that sort of thing, or comic books and Star Trek and this sort of thing. Back to the original, for me, Batman 66, first run, watching it back in the day on ABC in color, and just obsessed with comics all of my life. And I've really been fascinated by the legal aspect of it. It's just something that even before I thought I was going to be a lawyer, I liked reading about. And I started writing about it, 18 or so years ago. And then my writing got picked up by Newsarama and The Beat and Comics Journal. And people started asking me a lot of questions. So I just tried to answer as many questions as I could, including in cases about obscenity law and free speech. And so when there was a time of transition in leadership a few years ago, I got in touch and said, hey, I've worked with nonprofit organizations. I'm dedicated to the cause, anything I can do to help. And so I've been here, and it's been a really interesting experience. I've really enjoyed it. Met a lot of wonderful people in the comics community throughout the country. It's been fantastic.
Now, as a football fan, I hear the word interim. That's usually just a tie over until the regular guy. So why just interim?
Oh yeah. The organization had, like I said, there was a time of transition back in 2020 where they were looking for new leadership. And I guess they'd had a history of someone who'd been here been in the organization for a long time. There was a sense that you had an executive director, and the executive director was forever. And just given the circumstances in which I came in, again, sort of in a transitional period, and also as a nonprofit person who wanted to send the message that I thought that the organization was bigger than any one individual. I didn't think it should be synonymous with the executive director. I really see just like the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund came out of the community and has had this amazing life for decades. I wanted to send a message that I'm going to be here, help what I can, sort of establish the programs and face the current challenges, and then I'm not going to put myself up to be running this thing for the next infinite period of time. I want people to have a sense that you can have an executive director, but the executive director is not necessarily going to be there forever. It's not going to be the one person on whom the fate of the organization relies. If the CBLDF is really everybody in the comics community who is concerned about this issue, and there will be somebody after me.
Okay. I think I got to switch into the opening question, which is, why do so many books that we consider the seminal works like Mouse and Watchmen and Sandman and Bone, why are always those the ones that are getting challenged?
Well, if you can elaborate on your question, because I think you're going in a very good direction.
Yeah, it just seems that the ones that really make people think and get things rolling are the ones that everybody's catching up, or the ones that are getting challenged. Is that the connection? Is if it's outside the norm or it makes people think, then that's what gets people upset?
I think there are a couple things associated with that. Part of it is part of it has to do with framing, sort of an interpretive grid that people bring to the comics medium, and that is, even though those of us in comics know this not to have been true for decades, there's still an assumption among many people in American society, particularly the older you are, they assume this, that comics are for kids and they adhere to a certain content code that goes back to the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even people growing up in the 70s and 80s. They're thinking about the sort of thing that you might have gotten on a drugstore, at a drugstore at a spinner rack. They're not thinking that it's something that's challenging. They're not thinking that it's something that has what you might consider to be more mature content, than Batman and Robin, doing holy blank, and tackling the Joker, who's just relatively benign, pulling pranks. They see it as a children's medium, and that's in many ways a reflection of sort of the evolution of communications in the West, as well as some other trends in Western society, where pictures were deemed to be untrustworthy and childlike. Really, if you were going to be doing some serious thinking, serious writing, serious communicating, it had to be in text. And so the more you have these classics works that are in a way a rival to text, the more they are dealing with adult themes, the more there was a bit of cognitive dissonance in people who are viewing comics in one particular way.
Now, what are there's a lot of different books that we're looking at, but is there a commonality to what they're being challenged about? Is it mainly obscenity? What are the types of cases you guys are dealing with?
Yeah. Part of that depends on the context. Because comics are so associated with kids, and because comics have been making these dramatic inroads in education over the past few years, what's been driving things largely since 2020, since the pandemic, there has been this concern that comics are particularly problematic for children. And so the attacks on those have come from a couple different angles. One is a resurrection of the old canard that comics are subliterate. We saw coming out of Texas, in late 2020, mid 2021, there were a bunch of cases that started bubbling up during the pandemic. And these were largely, parents seeing their kids reading comics in school on Zoom. This was a new thing. They realized, hey, kids are reading comics as part of their education, and they saw this as highly problematic. And so the complaints would include things like saying that, by reading comics, it meant that you're keeping kids from learning what they need to learn to survive in society because you're not teaching them real literacy. A comic book can only be a second or third grade level. I mean, they're not even reading the books. They just assume that these comics are corrupting kids' minds, keeping them from making academic progress. And so the notion that comics are subliterate has been a real problem. And that's something we're seeing nationwide. The other part of it is the content itself. And this is something which is schools, libraries, and beyond. Just this notion that comics are graphic in the sense that they are extreme and sexually oriented. One of the things that we did, I'm a lawyer, right? And I'm also someone who works in nonprofits, interim director of the CBLDF. And for the first time in the CBLDF's history, the director, me, actually represented a client in court. It's apparently something that's never been done. We've always, worked with other attorneys, but we actually went out and did this. And in this case in Virginia Beach, where they were trying to get the book Genderqueer declared obscene, and you would go to jail if you distributed the book, if you gave it to a kid, if you sold it in a way where the kids could access it, if libraries made it available to kids, anybody, they could all go to jail. In the complaint against Genderqueer, they described graphic novels. They used the phrase graphic sexual novels. The assumption that the graphic novel is something that is like a Trojan horse for sex and also extreme thoughts about race. And so with the notion that graphic novels are this bad graphic medium, there have been calls for to have libraries to be required to have graphic novels behind circulation desk, and you have to provide an ID, just like you would have to provide an ID to get cigarettes or maybe to go to an X-rated movie or something. And that's the only way you could get a graphic novel, because graphic novels are that dangerous and corrupting. So, part of it is, subliterate. Another part of it is this extreme critical race theory, racial content, or extreme sexual content.
This just popped in my head, but since a lot of people who complain about these books, as you said earlier, don't actually read them, or they see them, a glimpse of them from their kids, could it be the terminology of graphic novel? Because the use of the word graphic is oftentimes associated with things like, the scenes of a graphic nature,
exactly,
stuff like that. Do you think the terminology graphic novel is now working against publishers in this sense?
I think it's an incredibly good point. We do seem to have a naming problem in this field, in this medium, right? Comic book. It's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be light. It's supposed to be for kids. How many times do I see they call it a comic book, but it's not funny? That there's all this sex stuff in it. I've seen that nonsense. And now graphic novel, graphic being extreme, hypersexual. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's time to reboot the term. I don't know. I mean, that I think would be a very interesting discussion to hear in the community. I mean, we've had several terms over the years, right? Sequential art is another. The comic arts, I think people are trying to move toward. I know that's at San Diego, the celebration of the comic arts at San Diego Comic-Con. I'll be interested to see how the term itself evolves.
Yeah, because I like I said, I hadn't even thought about that way until you started talking about that. And it's like, the word graphic does seem to have its own connotation to it, which could trigger people. Yeah.
But it's tough because you have something like graphic design, right? Which isn't about designing sex logos. It's about, it's about this visual design and corporate identity and that sort of thing. So, it's a very tough one.
Um, this is going to take us a little bit down a political path here.
It's all right.
But there has been this movement towards, I'm going to say it, against intelligence, against literacy in a lot of ways. And you see stuff like in Florida where they're restricting a ton of books, and to the point where librarians can't even display the books till somebody comes in and approves them. They have to have them covered. How is this affecting comic publishers or graphic novel publishers? Is this, they're getting caught up in this as well, I'm assuming?
I think that another great question. It is having ripple effects throughout the entire industry, both in terms of publishers as well as the creators, the ability of certain creators to make a living from their work. So one of the, I did an interview for a news source a few months ago about the topic, about the question of, hey, isn't just censorship great? Because there's so many books where the sales have gone up after they've been censored, like Mouse or Genderqueer, the sales have spiked, right? But those are really the rare ones, the exceptions. There are some books, like you said from the outset, that are pretty well established. They're part of what we consider to be a canon. And yes, we've seen, works like Drama by Raina Telgemeier, that does well despite being censored, or maybe even because of it in some localities. Or Genderqueer, or Flamer, or Let's Talk About It, Mouse. We're seeing graphic novels that sales go up with interest, but there are a number of people who do not want to risk legal action. They don't, in states where criminalization is on the table, Missouri, North Dakota, Utah, a number of states have harmful to minors laws. So it's not just Florida, it's literally all over the country. People are afraid of getting arrested. And so what's happening is, while you have a few books that have enough support that people buy them and they can sort of withstand the push to censor in a number of communities, you have a number of other books that are being taken out of libraries, taken out of schools, taken out of stores, because people don't want to risk getting arrested, and they're not sure that they'll be able to survive, that they'll be able to win if there are charges that are brought against them. And publishers, they don't want their work to be called child pornography, which is the word that's being thrown out all the time about comics now. It's child pornography. There isn't a publisher out there, I think, that wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I want to be called a press that does child porn. And what I'm hearing from people is that you're finding things like their books aren't getting picked up now, or creators, they're just not able to sell to a mainstream publisher. They're really having to push for self-publishing, and their books aren't getting picked up by retailers. There was an incident that actually happened. We were at C2E2 last year and had a panel on this question, and one of the authors talked about the author of anyway, I'll go into that a little later. Author talked about how their work had been taken off of Target, that a number of graphic novels that were considered to be having LGBTQ or sex-related themes were just, they just one day they just disappeared. And they were gone. And that was yes, it was the Magic Fish. That graphic novel was gone. A number of other graphic novels were gone, and there were some protests, and they got restored at Target. But what do you do about the fact that there are a number of books that never get picked up in the first place now?
Do you think that this is causing publishers and even some creators to change what they're doing to stay away from topics and stuff?
No question. People are afraid. And I don't mean this in the sense of, and I want to be clear about this because I talk to people all over the country, New York, Connecticut, Maine, and I say this because people assume it's just, the South, conservatives. No. It is all over the country. It's bipartisan. It often crosses the ideological spectrum. Remember that the big thing now, where it went viral nationwide, there may have been some steps along the way that were in Texas, but it really hit in Virginia, in the area right outside Washington, D.C., sort of home of progressive parents, people who work in the Pentagon and in the White House and in the major agencies. I mean, that is where this thing took off in a huge way. In other words, not exactly a hotbed of conservatism. And what we're encountering are people are afraid. Librarians. I'm just thinking of conversations I've had where I'm talking to a librarian who's in the middle of this and saying, Jeff, just don't let anybody know I talked to you because I don't want to get fired. Or, like yesterday, I gave a talk at Emerald City with our president and chair of the board, Christina Merkler. And I was saying, one of the things that I have found that I've had to do in advising people is I have to really fly as under the radar as I can. There's a lot of that I do. And I know people have asked me, why aren't you publicizing this? Why aren't you, sending out press releases all the time about all the things you're doing? Why? Well, here's an example that happened after I talked about this. In Louisiana, there's some libraries that are undergoing some challenges right now. And they got rid of the member of the library board, and it's likely they're going to get rid of the head of it because they consulted with the ABA, the American Library Association. It became publicly known that they were seeking advice outside the community, and bam, that's now a firing offense. So it's these are really difficult circumstances that people are in. So I can't say, like when you mentioned, I know people work with Comics Pro, and I love Comics Pro, and I just did a session with them in conjunction with the most recent annual meeting. And that retailers across the country are having to deal with this, and they don't want people coming into the shop who are like undercover police or something like that, or parents come in and buy stuff and then refer them to the police. So they're trying to figure out, how do I know what books are going to get me into trouble? And they're not asking that question out of a spirit of censorship. They're asking that question out of a spirit of survival.
Right.
And I don't want to ramble on, but in Missouri, there was a law that was criminalized distributing certain types of material to students. And we just saw graphic novels taken off the slate across the state. And books you wouldn't even consider to be close to harmful to minors or obscene or pornographic or anything, because people are that afraid. And that's what we're fighting. That's what we're trying to get these laws declared unconstitutional. We're trying to help people come up with strategies for responding to this kind of threatening environment. I mean, this is a battle right now that's having real consequences for publishers who don't want to get caught up in these controversies, authors who don't want to be blacklisted effectively, librarians who don't want to lose their jobs, retailers who don't want to lose their shops.
Is it getting worse? Are you getting more and more challenges? And why do you think it is? Is it has it started from the pandemic, because you mentioned the pandemic earlier, or is it the political climate? What is driving this increase in challenges?
There are a number of different factors, but for me, the pandemic played a major role, and it was something that I saw unfold in real time. When I came on board, there hadn't been an arrest of anybody in retail in years, I think well over a decade at that point. And there were people I know in the comics community who were saying, well, maybe there isn't a need for this anymore. We're not living in 1986, right? And we were seeing these challenges, a school here, a library there, but it was still sort of incidental and people didn't think it was big. But it was evident internally that the nature of these challenges had shifted. And it had to do with the move indoors during the pandemic. You remember, essentially the whole nation was quarantined, right?
Right.
And kids were taking their classes over Zoom at home. And what happened was that graphic novels have been more and more mainstreamed in education because, quite frankly, if you want to be literate in the 21st century, you have to understand how images and words work together. If you don't understand how to communicate through images, you can't do PowerPoint, you can't do YouTube videos, you can't do infographics. Really, comics are the template for communication now, and they will be for, I think, for the rest of the century and beyond. So kids were learning through comics at school. And another thing that was happening was the sort of topics that were discussed in comics were changing. So people were using comics to talk about civil rights and race. And over the past 20 years, there's been a revolution in civil rights concerning gender expression, gender identity. When I was in law school, the Supreme Court said you could be thrown into jail for having a same-sex relationship. 20 or so years ago, the Supreme Court reverses that, and all of a sudden it's recognizing gay marriage, and it's we can say we can have gays in the military, we can have, and just 3 years ago, the Supreme Court says that civil rights laws cover, you can't fire somebody for being gay, you can't fire somebody for being transgender. I mean, this is really, really new, and people, just like they communicate any information, they start communicating it through comics. So parents are seeing this on Zoom. Mm-hmm. They're seeing comics in and of themselves, and they're seeing these topics show up in comics, and they go ballistic, and they start challenging them in schools. They start challenging ripple effects. They start challenging them in libraries. This starts having ripple effects throughout the community into retailers. And the flashpoint was, we're seeing these challenges in different places. There was New Kid and Class Act by Jerry Craft and Katie Texas, and a number of other books, American Born Chinese, Superman Smashes the Klan, a number of the books on LGBTQ themes that we talked about. But the flashpoint came in 2021. It was during the election in Virginia. This gets to the political part of the question you raised, where education had become an issue. And a parent in Virginia was watching one of the cases that we were working on in Texas. And in that case in Texas, the school board meetings were being held over Zoom. Anybody who wants this gig after me, just understand that part of your job will be involved listening to multi-hour school board meetings. So be very, very careful. It's not as exciting as you might think. So we're watching these school board meetings, and this parent in Virginia sees the school board meetings and says, hey, I got an idea. School board meetings are visual. So what if I take pages from Genderqueer and I hold them up to the camera? And then we post these excerpts and these images on Twitter. And what happens within 24 hours of this school board meeting is this goes viral nationwide. It gets tons of likes, tens of thousands of views. So what you have happening within days is parents in all 50 states going to their Zoom school board meetings and holding up Genderqueer and holding up New Kid and holding up other things. And this is a great way to get likes. You saw it today, just today. I think I was seeing on Twitter, Glenn Youngkin was doing this with images in Florida. Mm-hmm. And this thing goes viral. And we have not stopped since. I had actually predicted to my team, like the day that happened, we have a little meeting, and I said, we all got to watch this, because if the election, if the election in I think it was for the governor in 2021 since education was an issue, and the school board thing was now not just the election of the school board, was now being used by the gubernatorial candidate. I said, if the gubernatorial candidate gets within like 3% or wins with fighting graphic novels as the defining issues, we're going to be dealing this at least through, not just through 2022, we're just going to be 2024, 2026, and possibly beyond. I said, this is going to define us now. We have to really pull everything together and fight this. and build a network and fight this nationwide. And that's exactly what happened. He won election, and between a combination of it being a key to political success and just a way to get famous on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, it's almost daily here, to be honest with you, that I'm dealing with this. Just new cases and trying to help things out.
I'm going to borrow from two of the comments. Jen King talks about how she doesn't like the feeling that someone is trying to step into the space that parents belong.
Mm-hmm.
And Ed says, I can't believe in 2023, the so-called progressive era, that we're still talking about banning, censoring books. And I'm going to see if I can phrase a question out of this. From my perspective of what the political climate is that you have the two extreme sides of both parties who are very vocal, very out there doing these things that are pretty extreme. And then you have the majority of the country is in the middle doing their day-to-day life, not paying attention to this stuff. And then, how do we combat this? Is it educating the middle? Is it getting them involved? Because the CBLDF is doing a lot of great stuff dealing with the results, but how do we deal with the actual problem? Taking care of wounds that are created because of diabetes is great, but how do you treat the diabetes? In this case, how do we treat the extremes using this stuff as weapons? Is it education, or how do we do that?
Yeah. One, I'm just going to do and I like that you make that distinction, because I think that there is a mistake that people make, is assuming that fighting something in court is always the best way to go. I'm really proud of the work that we did in Virginia Beach. And the next time one of these cases comes up, we will be there. And whatever my title is with the CBLDF, I will go all in and do whatever I can to help, and bring in as many attorney friends that I know to help. We want to fight these things if they do go to court. But going to court is expensive. It can be a bit unpredictable in terms of what judge you get and what the tenor of the jury might be. Some of the most important work, if you ask me, is going to be local, and it's going to be something that everybody can do. And I think what people can do, there's really a couple of phases. One, work that can be done, say, before a challenge takes place, or the same sort of work that you want to do to sort of keep yourself steady work throughout a challenge. And then two, there's the work of responding to a challenge. So this is what I want to talk about in those two phases. And please interrupt me at any time. I know I can talk a little quickly and say a lot. So please tell me to pause, put on the brakes whenever I do. First, before a book is challenged, or maybe you've had a challenge and gone through it and now you want to figure out what to do next, we need to do whatever we can to normalize graphic novels. Education is absolutely key. There's nothing that will make people look ridiculous when they're trying to scare up a sensation. If you have a community that's used to graphic novels and know what they're really saying, they know how to read a graphic novel, they know how to bust somebody who is misrepresenting a graphic novel. As we did an event on Will Eisner Week last night, and with Jerry Kraft, Jeff Smith, Bone, and Danny Fingeroth, and Michael Dooley. It was a great crowd. Ben Catchor's Comics Roundtable. And one of the things I pointed out with genderqueer is people making these comments about what's in genderqueer that weren't really there. They were just completely misreading the text in the panels. And Jerry Kraft talked about, people were making all these comments about what was in New Kid in Class Act, and they said they made 5 mistakes about the first chapter. It's just, if you have people who know the books and are familiar with the books and encounter graphic novels in a context apart from the controversy, a number of these complaints will just be laughed out, because people will realize that there's nothing to be afraid of here. One of the things that I'm proud of is in my near where I grew up in a town called Kutztown, in Amish country.
Mm.
It was where I bought comics at a flea market called Renninger's. And a group of high school kids got together with their local comic shop and created a book club, a graphic novel book club. And so I think it's like every month they get together and talk about a different graphic novel. And in that community, which, Amish country, it has a very, morally conservative bent. Genderqueer was challenged, and it survived a challenge against all odds. And they're just kids there getting together at their local comic book store, talking about graphic novels, defending graphic novels in a very, literate, intelligent, informed way. That local involvement was worth 20 lawyers flying in from New York, who I can guarantee you there would not have been a great reaction to that. So a lot of what I do is working with people nationwide to say, okay, well, here's how you can create a culture in favor of comics in your community. Get local professors who love graphic novels to come talk about their work, or talk about graphic novels in your local library on a regular basis. If you haven't had a challenge yet, you have this happening. A lot of local libraries around the country, they have these things where people talk about books, or they talk about history, and have them come in and talk about graphic novels. Defang the fear, right? And then if there is a challenge, I will do whatever I can to help people. And I've reached out to, and I've talked to public officials. I will not name them because, as I mentioned in Louisiana, often if it's known that a public official is talking with somebody, they could end up losing their job. So, I will talk to people. Anybody who wants to reach out to me, whether it's a district attorney, a sheriff, a mayor, anybody who just wants to have a nice off-the-record conversation about this issue, or about a particular graphic novel, about the law, I will talk to them. Part of what I do is, if there's a lawyer for a comic shop who may have no experience in obscenity law or harmful to minors, the criminalization of displaying materials harmful to liars, I will talk to that lawyer and say, okay, well, here's what the law is. Here's what you need to be concerned about. Here's what you can say to a DA or a sheriff and diffuse things. If you have people at a meeting, yeah, sure, you could pool money and fly people in from around the country, but it's going to be more valuable. Have parents come in, and we talked about, the part of what's going on in the challenges. They say parents need to have rights. Well, if you can get a bunch of parents into the room and say, yeah, we need to have the rights to have graphic novels that we think are valuable for our kids, for their literacy, for their education and civil rights, for their just education and how to make it through life in general, then it becomes parent versus parent, which is a harder, battle for that other side to win. So part of what I'm trying to do here is build a network of people locally. University professors, teachers, students who are interested in standing up for comics, creators, anything we can do to normalize comics before they become a problem, and then to defend comics in the community in conjunction with people nationwide after they become a problem. And that's I think it's going to be the strongest thing coming forward. I do not think that another thing I want to say, and I know this maybe seem a little bit counterintuitive, but just as you don't want to be called a child pornographer, I mean, nobody wants to be called that. That's awful. I think that we're in this mutually assured destruction sort of a cycle of everybody's calling each other names.
Yeah.
So I'm not going in and saying, well, you may say that we're defending child pornography. Well, you're just a bunch of Nazi censors. Well, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But I just say, okay, well, here's the issue you're trying to address, and here's how we can address this. You're concerned that kids are getting this. Well, actually, that's not really happening. Actually, that's not what's here. And here's, you say that, like when in Florida, they want to have all this explicit sexual material cut out, or any references to sex cut out. It's like, well, the Supreme Court said that this is protected. Are you saying that kids can't talk about that? The Supreme Court defended this in certain literary contexts. Are you saying the Supreme Court is a bunch of child pornographers that shouldn't be listened to? Maybe we should listen to the Supreme Court and think about how we can honor that.
So we need to not let ignorance and misinformation be a weapon used against us. basically.
No question. That every
Yeah.
part of the thing to remember is if you get dragged into a Twitter war where you start fighting like to like in terms of just calling each other names and trying to up how horrible the other side is, the other side usually wins. You know, they.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just try to present sort of a calm, rational alternative to the heat.
For anybody just joined us, we're talking to Jeff Trexler, interim director of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. We've talked about how do we deal with the underlying cause.
Mm-hmm.
How can we help dealing with this? You know, how can we help the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund? How can the average person get involved, whether it's donations or is there
Mm-hmm.
anything else we can do?
Obviously, donations are going to be very important for us because let me just tell you, I'll just break it down very, a matter of fact. One of the things that we're doing during my time here is trying to build a volunteer network. I'm right now working on putting together some apps to put on our site. We're going to be redoing our website soon. We're in the process of making that happen. And one of the things that I'm doing for the website is just putting together, just linking some apps together with our court sort of records of our members and that sort of thing so that people can volunteer. And I want to get volunteers, like I said, lawyers, academics, teachers, librarians, students, creators, fans, anybody who is concerned about this and wants to help in their community so that the next time there's a challenge, I can press a button in that community and I'll have a network that we can all, get together and talk about it. And so when that goes up, just, that will cost no money. Just, fill it out, say you're interested and you're willing to talk. You'd like to start a graphic novel club in your community, or you'd like to talk to the library and see what we can do about that. Let's get that up. I really want to get that up before I am gone as executive director, and I want to do that very soon. Financial support is very important, and the reason it's very important is that I'll tell you the sort of the big expense that we have in this current environment. When you bring in lawyers, I said I represented, Maya Kobabe, author of Genderqueer in Virginia Beach. I did not, no billable hours coming from me in that case, right? But when you are working with lawyers defending something in court, or bringing in counsel to help even outside of court, local counsel, that typically costs money, and that costs a lot of money. You want really good lawyers, it's going to cost money to win these cases. And so building up the ability to be able to take cases nationwide is incredibly important, and any financial support we can get is incredibly helpful. And it can come in a lot of different ways. We have a membership program. Definitely welcome that. We're revitalizing our publishers program, our retailer program. I know that there's probably one of you out of there. I know I owe you an email about that, and so I'll get back to you soon. Just got back from traveling. We'll take care of that. But we've had publishers who've been and gaming companies actually who've been naming us for support on Humble Bundle, which has been fantastic, which we really appreciate. So anything we can do so that the next time there is, because we're going to be back in court again. It's just, that's when you have people nationwide trying to criminalize selling graphic novels or putting them in the library, we're going to be in court again. Anything you can do will be part of that. I see somebody mentioned about autographs and that sort of thing. Yeah, we actually are at our conventions. We have an auction. We also are going to have special signings and things like that. So with creators and publishers and various things, we have a lot of those things in the work coming up soon too. So please, anything you can do would definitely be helpful for the cause.
And you have some of those items available on your website as well, right?
We have some available now, and we're also in the process of expanding that for the near future.
And that's cbldf.org.
cbldf.org. Yeah.
So you can look at the stuff to buy. You could make donations and bookmark it. So when they do get it revamped and they get the volunteer thing done, you can sign up. So.
Yep. And I have to say, I appreciate everyone. I just say, I say it does a lot to us. Just say hi. When we're at a convention, we have a panel that we call Defending Comics Today that we try to give at every convention where we appear. Show up, ask questions, share your experiences. We love to meet you all over the country and hear what you're dealing with. It helps us tremendously just to know what's going on the ground. It makes us better able to help you.
I'm going to give you one last question and give you a chance to give people some hope.
Mm-hmm.
You've been doing this now for a while. You've been near a couple of years. And we've been talking about how things are getting a little worse and there's more challenges and stuff. Are you seeing, though, progress? Are you seeing...
Oh, yeah.
So what is it you're seeing that gives you a little bit of hope?
One reason why, and this was true in the 50s as well, the reason why the response was so virulent is because there was this sense that comics were powerful, comics were inevitable. There was a sense that society was changing in ways that people didn't like. But it's hard when you have this kind of dramatic shift in a culture. We're seeing this kind of shifts that I don't think anybody can stop. We've had this massive expansions of civil rights. We've had this recognition that comics really are the future in terms of literacy, that comics have changed how we communicate. Comics will continue to change how we communicate. People are reading them. They're going to be part of education in libraries and just the reading experience for decades to come. And I think part of the reason the reaction is so strong is that there's a sense among the opponents that our side has already won. And I think that rather than responding on our side in fear and a sense that, oh my word, we could lose everything we fought for, it's just have this recognition that this is out there because we really do have the power now. We really do have something special to offer society. Comics matter. They matter more than they've ever mattered in American life, in life globally. And I think we can go forward in the confidence defending this work, knowing that we will win. They're never going to wipe comics out again. And I think having that confidence, I think, can help us sort of summon the courage to fight the battles that need to be fought to make that happen.
Now I've got some hope.
Well, and I'm glad because the people who are going to make the difference, it's you. It's this podcast. It's the listeners. It's everybody who reads comics. It's everybody who cares about comics. The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, I'm really glad we're here. I'm glad the organization is here. But ultimately, our strength is you. It is every single one of you out there listening to this, watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, who's part of that community. That is what is going to make the future of comics so great.
Well, I don't think there's a better way we could end the segment than that line right there. So, Jeff, thank you very much for coming on. It has been a pleasure speaking with you.
And I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Excellent questions. I've enjoyed watching the comments. Thank you for being here, and thanks for having this podcast.
Yeah. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today or who's going to be watching this later on YouTube and the other networks. Stick around. We got Comic Collectibles coming up next and got a full night of shows. So stick around for everything. Thank you. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Right. Thanks all. Thanks.
Do you remember what it was like when you were a little kid and you got a letter in the mail? Now imagine that letter was filled with information about your favorite shows, pop culture questions, links to things you're going to want to see later, and even sneak peeks at upcoming programming here on The Experience. That's what the EXP mailing list is. Every week, we send you sneak peeks, information, and all of the relevant links for all of the shows you want to see. Sign up now on our website or scan the QR code that's on your screen right now.